in the night.
We spoke about it, and I sent you.
Yeah.
All right, we're rolling. All right, so last week I said that we were going to get to chapter 5 because we were just going to run through the last couple Mishnahs of chapter 4, and it didn't happen because the last couple Mishnahs of chapter 4 had 10 different topics in 2 Mishnahs. So now for real, we're in chapter 5. Chapter 5, Mishnah 1, we are going to get down to the nitty-gritty of Pesach. And the core of Pesach, the core mitzvah of Pesach, comes in a couple parts. One of them, of course, everybody is very familiar with, which is matzah, right? The other goes along with the matzah is the maror, the bitter herbs. And the third main part of Pesach is...
It's right.
That's what we remember, that the telling of the redemption. But in terms of the single act that has to be there for Pesach to be Pesach, the lamb. You have to have the sacrifice.
What was the name of the rabbi in the Agadah that said the 3 things that you need to say in Pesach?
Oh, you're going to embarrass it. It's Gamliel, isn't it? Is it Rabbi Gamliel?
Yeah, Rabbi Gamliel.
Yeah. So you have to remember the 3, right? And this is the one that everybody forgets because we don't do this one anymore. Right. I mean, yes, we have the shank bone on the Seder plate, but we don't have a temple in Jerusalem to take the lambs to have them be sacrificed to eat as the centerpiece of our Seder. And so we often forget this is one of the big mitzvahs of the entire year, and one that we can't do. And yet I'm willing to guess, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, nobody here feels that they can't celebrate Pesach just because they don't have the sacrifice.
I'm happy.
You're happy?
Yes, I like more the rabbinical Judaism than the Second Temple Judaism. That's personal.
Well, that rabbinical Judaism versus Second Temple Judaism we're going to get into, because chapter 5 is all about the blood. It's all about the sacrifice. We're going to talk about cooking it later. But right now, we're talking about what you do at the temple itself.
Only keep in mind that at least I didn't eat dinner. So it's very sensitive topic.
It's not too gruesome. Not too gruesome. Don't worry. It's pretty straightforward. We're not doing the full study of like the anatomy of sacrifices that comes in other parts of Mishnah. This is just when do you do it and how do you do it, because it's special. But there's a couple little pieces I want to make sure we understand. So this sacrifice is to be eaten during the Seder, right? Everyone understands that. So you go to the temple during the day, you get the animal sacrificed, you take it back, and then you're going to eat it during the Seder. Make sense? Good. We want to make sure that we understand that we're not just eating it at the temple. This is going to be the part of the Seder. And who do you eat it with?
Your family.
Your family, okay.
And a guest, neighbors.
Okay. So guests and neighbors, kind of. So here's a wrinkle when you have the sacrifice, which we don't have to worry about now, which is you are all obligated to eat from the Passover sacrifice, right? That's an individual mitzvah for every single person. But lambs are big. I mean, we're not talking about little tiny, lamb chop lamb, for Jerry Lewis, It's not a tiny little lamb. It's a full animal. And you're not allowed to do Tupperware.
That's why it's not connected to the beginning of the Seder when you say, open the door, whoever is hungry, come and eat with us.
Exactly. You are expected to invite more people to be joined.
Poor people, especially.
Well, not just poor, but even just neighbors or other friends. You join together. You form a collective. You form a co-op, I guess would be the best English word. You form a co-op to go in on the same lamb so that all of you are participating in the sacrifice, even though only one lamb goes to the temple. So you might have one lamb for 5, 6 families, or groups of people that would be participating together around the Seder. So that's going to be an important part of where we go on our Mishnah, of who's eating this thing. And you had to understand that there would be, usually most people would have agreed in advance agreed in advance who was going to be eating from this lamb. It wasn't like you just went to the temple, you slaughtered the lamb, and then you walked around going, anyone want to join me for Pesach? You arranged all of this in advance because everyone had to know they had a lamb that was going to be sacrificed for them, right? And not just for them, it would be for the group, but everyone had to know that a lamb was going to be sacrificed at the temple for their mitzvah.
But who need to be there present at the time of the sacrifice? Not all the guests.
Not all the guests.
Only the owner of the lamb.
Yeah, the designated representative, because sometimes the land would be owned by more than one person or more than one family. It'd be like a co-op, it's everybody owns a piece of the lamb, so kind of, right? So, and then they're going to eat a piece of the lamb.
And why they cannot be all of them there? They can't, or it's or it's practical, or is mandatory that only one delegated?
It's really more of a practical. I just want to make sure that wasn't Penelope. No, okay. Because sometimes Penelope will text me if the recording isn't working. She's my technical support. But it wasn't. It was nothing.
Watching it live now.
She usually does. Yeah, she does that she does that because sometimes she likes to watch it, and also because she knows it helps me if there's a problem that I can reset the technology and get it going correctly, and then I don't have to lose the study.
Oh.
So it's basically practical, because think for a moment, if you just had, and this would be a tiny number, but imagine you only had 500,000 people in the entire country, right? And let's say we have an average family size of 5. That's 100,000 lambs that would be going up to sacrifice if there was one lamb per family. You say, okay, well, maybe we're not going to do one lamb per family. Maybe we're going to do one lamb for every 5 families. Right, and so now we take that 100,000 and we're down to only 20,000. It's still an awful lot of lamb, right? And don't misunderstand that. And that's why it would have been more than 5 families would be participating. But if you didn't keep reducing the number of lambs, or if you kept reducing the number of lambs, but you didn't reduce the number of people, you'd have 500,000 people all in the room. And in fact, we're going to talk about how the sacrificial service went to move the people through the temple, because it's a very real issue of how do you get all the people and all the lamb sacrificed and everyone back home in time for the Seder. Because in fact, that's going to be our very first issue, is time. Okay, so that's enough introduction. I hope we'll add as we go if we need to fill in. But let's go ahead and hit chapter 5, Mishnah 1. And I'm looking for a volunteer to read in a nice, loud, clear voice. All right, you're up?
Okay.
Okay. So we're Pesachim, chapter 5, Mishnah 1.
The afternoon Tamid is slaughtered at 8.5 hours and is offered at 9.5 hours.
All right. So since we're talking about Passover, the most important thing to do is talk about something that isn't for Passover. So the first line here of the Mishnah has nothing to do with Passover. This is just the regular Tamid offering, right? This is the daily offering that happens in the afternoon. The offering that was commemorated by the institution of Mincha.
How many offers can do at the same time?
This
Because it's 8.5, and you have like 100 different lambs you have in a room.
You guys okay? Finding where we are?
No.
Okay, because I don't think that's the right page. If you're looking at there, you need chapter 5, Mishnah 1. Okay, so this first line of the Mishnah is not talking about the Passover sacrifice. This is talking about, keep going, the regular, normal daily sacrifice needs to be done at 8.5 hours, right? Until 9.5 hours. That's your window of time.
They can do only one sacrifice at a time?
You only need to do one sacrifice of the Tamid. The Tamid was a community sacrifice. You did one sacrifice for everyone, right? This is the sacrifice. Right? You do one sacrifice of the Tamid on behalf of the entire country. This is just the regular day-to-day operations. Every day, like clockwork,
Rabbi.
between 8.5 and 9.5 hours. Remember, we're talking about hours of daylight. So 8.5 hours is going to be like 2.5 hours after midday, right? So it's going to be the early afternoon-ish that this is happening.
They're counting the 8.5 and 9.5 for the evening, I guess,
Mm,
or
no,
from
so
the
it's-
morning.
right,
from the morning.
exactly. So you have,
From
Let's see if I can-
Netzach or whatever.
exactly. So you have from the morning until the evening, and you divide that
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I really kind of misjudged that. And so this would be hour 1, hour 2, hour 3, hour 4, hour 5, hour 6, and
That's it.
right, that's midday, and then 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 is when the sun is gone, right? The day is over.
Over.
And so what they're saying is that on an unusual day, between 8.5 and 9.5, that's your tummy. And indeed, to this day, we normally, when we do mincha, we aim to do mincha around that time.
Mhm.
That's the appropriate time for doing mincha. It's not the only time, as we're going to see, but that is
Is
the
it mincha katan or gadol?
exactly. So this is the gadol. This is when it's supposed to be done. It's the better time for mincha because it's the time of the tamid. It's the time that matches the sacrifice. However, Passover comes along, and we are nothing if not practical. And if you're waiting until 8.5 hours to begin your sacrifices, or 9.5 even, then you've only got a few hours left before it's nighttime.
Too late.
And you need to not just sacrifice the animal, but you have to cook the animal. And cooking takes time. So if we're waiting for the tamid and then doing the Passover sacrifice after it, we're in trouble. Which brings us to line 2.
Line 2. On the eve of Pesach, it is slaughtered at 7.5 hours and offered at 8.5 hours, whether it is a weekday or Shabbat.
Right? So whether Passover is going to start Shabbat night, that is to say Motzei Shabbat, the end of Shabbat, or whether it's going to be on a weekday, they move it back to 7.5 and 8.5, right? So this is the Pesach Tamid. That sounds wrong. It's the Tamid of the day before Pesach, right? It's the 14th of Nisan's Tamid offering. It's moved back an hour to give you an extra hour to cover all the Passover sacrifices. Make sense?
Makes sense.
However, one more permutation, one more option.
3. If the eve of Pesach fell on the eve of Shabbat, it is slaughtered at 6.5 hours and offered at 7.5 hours, and the Pesach offering after it.
Right? So from 6.5 to 7.5, that's when it's an Erev Shabbat Pesach. Right? When Pesach is going to start Friday night, then you have to slaughter the tamid, the regular daily offering, at the earliest possible time. And indeed, this is the earliest possible time you can do mincha. To this day for tefillah, and that's just after midday. And so you go ahead and you do it right then, and that way you have the whole rest of the afternoon. Because what's the difference between when it's a weekday and when it's Shabbat? What's the difference?
You cannot cook.
Cooking, exactly right.
You cannot
Right, a
cook.
weekday chag, you can keep
Yeah.
English. You can keep cooking on a weekday chag after the chag has begun.
Because Eruv Tavshilin.
Exactly. Well, no, actually, no, that's not the issue. It's you're allowed to cook on a chag.
On a Chag.
There are certain
Shabbat.
things you can't do, but for most types of cooking, you can do it on the chag for the needs of the chag for that day. You can't cook, a batch of cookies for next week, especially not in Pesach. But you can cook for the chag. So if you need to cook your Seder sacrifice a little bit longer into the chag on a regular weekday or even Motzei Shabbat, no problem. But when it's Shabbat and Passover at the same time, you don't get to cook on Shabbos, even for Passover. And that means you have to make sure that the tamid is done as early as possible, so the Passover sacrifices can be done as early as possible, so the cooking can begin as early as possible, so it can all be done before Shabbat/Passover begins.
So Pesach never came in Motzei Shabbat. It never started in Motzei Shabbat.
No, it can't.
I think
But-
this
but-
year.
But
I think this year it's going to be.
maybe yes. So how can you do the sacrifice of the lamb in the middle of Shabbat? Because if you sacrifice the lamb,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the fire is there, but
Right.
you are still kind of cooking when you sacrifice.
Okay, so sacrifices, things that are happening in the temple itself, are permitted on Shabbat. Right? The slaughter of the lamb, the sprinkling of the blood, the burning of the fat, all of that on Shabbat as a sacrifice is permitted. Cooking it for dinner is not.
So מותר לך לשבור את השבת אם זה קשור
So you're going to be cooking after, right? So it means you're going to have a very late Seder because you're going to have the lamb. It's going to be killed. It's going to be the sacrificing parts, right? Parts of the fats and the blood are going to be sprinkled on the altar and burned. Then you're going to take the lamb home and you're going to wait until after Havdalah, and then you're going to start cooking. Right? So yeah, it's going to be a late start. And for those of you that have ever had second day, because it usually happens more often that you end up with second day Seder happening on Motzei Shabbat, that is a problem. It means you can't start cooking unless you cooked it before Shabbat began. You can't start cooking until Havdalah, and that means your Seder is going to begin late and it's going to go rather late. Okay, so we got that basic idea? All right, so you notice already from the start, as the rabbis are discussing the sacrifices, things are going to have to be moved. They're going to have to be adjusted to fit the unique aspect of this, because there are a lot of sacrifices happening. Right, the Tamid, boom, one animal, we're done. Passover, it's one animal per group of people who are joining for the Seder. That's a lot of animals, and that is pushing the whole schedule. Good? Good.
Yeah.
Mishnah 2.
1.
Mishnah 2, part 1.
Part
Yeah.
1. Pesach sacrifice, which a person slaughtered.
That should be 4. Slaughtered 4. There's a word missing in the text.
Okay. Slaughtered 4.
Mm-hmm.
Another person.
Purpose.
Purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Or caught the blood, or brought it, or sprinkled its blood for another purpose.
Go ahead and read the next one too.
Or for its own purpose and for another purpose, or for another purpose and for its own purpose, it is disqualified.
Okay.
This is a little confusing.
A little confusing? Okay, good. So I think I mentioned last week, I'll repeat it again, intention matters. Right? Why did you have the Kohen slaughter the animal? What was in your mind? Was it, this is for Pesach, or this is for a shlamim offering, right? This is for a well-being offering, or this is for a sin offering, or this is for some other reason. What were you thinking when you had the animal sacrifice? What were you thinking when the blood was being caught during the slaughter? What were you thinking when the blood was being sprinkled? And what it's basically saying here is that if you were planning to use this animal for another purpose, and then suddenly went, oh, right, Passover. How did I forget? Oh, yeah, it's good for that. I meant this one for Passover. I'll do the Thanksgiving offering another time. Yeah, just make this one for Pesach instead. Can you do that, Mr. Kohen? No. If you brought it with the intention of another reason, or if you brought it for Pesach and then switched your intention to another reason, it's no longer a Passover lamb. Right? Nothing changed in the lamb. Right? It didn't physically mutate and become different, but your intention changed what it was. Right? Because something is only considered holy or designated for a particular purpose by what we choose it to be designated for.
So, Rabbi, was there sacrifice every Shabbat, or 3 times or twice a year, which was Pesach and Yom Kippur?
So there were sacrifices every day, three times sacrifices for the community. Right, every day, not every individual, but the community itself.
Right.
would have a sacrifice 3 times a day and 4 times on Shabbat.
Whoa.
Yeah, well, it's not that much, right? It's only 365 days a year. We're talking about, it's a little over 1,000 animals a year for the whole country to be sacrificing. That's not a huge amount. It's very reasonable. The individual was required to bring a sacrifice for
Sin.
well, I'm thinking for the holidays,
Oh.
right? For the 3 Chagim, for Passover, for Sukkot, for Shavuot, and would also bring if they needed a sin offering, or would bring for a well-being offering, or would bring for if they'd done a Nazirite vow or other special cases. But there weren't that many times an individual had to bring a sacrifice. It was just the 3 pilgrimage festivals: Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. Make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. But at the other times of the year, not everybody did, right? They would come to Jerusalem if they could to celebrate for the other Chagim. And they would bring a sacrifice if they could for the other Chagim. But this is the one where everyone had to. This is the one that was the mitzvah, to be eating this on Passover night. And that's why you ended up with a big crowd at the temple and a big logistical problem. But before we get back into logistical problems, they want to make sure that we have the right mental awareness of what we're doing.
I promise you, I didn't realize the sacrifice was every day, 3 times a day.
Mhm.
I didn't realize that. I thought it was like maybe possibly on Shabbat and on high holy days, or
Mhm.
like the.
There were extra sacrifices for those days and for other holidays as well. But think of it this way: if there weren't sacrifices every day, the temple would have just been standing there empty of activity for most of the year.
Mhm.
It was doing stuff every day.
No wonder why Kugela didn't survive.
So,
Because he wanted to put his own statue in the middle of the temple.
Yeah, well, of course, he wanted his own
And he
sacrifices.
didn't survive in 30 days after trying to do that.
how long did it take each sacrifice?
I mean,
In
which
time,
which
in
sacrifice? Which each?
Let's say the
You mean like the
Passover.
regular Tamid sacrifice? Or
Passover.
we're going to come to that because they're going to actually give us a bit of a benchmark for how long the sacrifices took. But we're not quite there. But the actual sacrifice itself among the Kohanim for the regular Tamid sacrifice or the regular holiday sacrifices that didn't have the crowd of people, but just were the regular, I don't want to say run of the mill because it sounds wrong, but the routine sacrifices rather than the crowd ones. They don't take any longer than it takes to slaughter an animal. So
But they need to cook it, like in the sacrifice.
Yeah.
They're cooking.
well, some of them are cooked and eaten. Some of them were cooked and just obliterated in the heat, in the fire. But yeah, it doesn't take a huge amount of time. It's not 2 minutes and it's not 5 hours per sacrifice. So, and you didn't cook the sacrifice on the altar,
I know.
right? You didn't actually cook it for dinner on the
Oh,
altar,
Okay.
right? You burnt the fats on the altar, the special fat that wasn't permitted, and you burnt the blood on the altar. Well, the altar and the fire, but
Okay.
the actual food was not cooked on the altar, on the mizbeach. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Where did they cook the rest of the meat?
Uh,
Kohanim ate it.
Yeah, the Kohanim. Well, for most of the sacrifices, the Kohanim
Kohanim.
ate from the extra, the parts that weren't offered
Yeah.
on the altar. Yes,
So where did they cook it? They had
they had their own kitchens,
Stove.
and a stove and an oven. Sorry, there's nothing fancier than that.
Rabbi, it's so amazing how Judaism is still alive till this day, since there's no more sacrifice.
And that is one of the miracles of our history, because, as I said at the very beginning, I make you bet most of you don't even think about the fact that the major activity you would have had in mind come Passover wasn't cleaning the house. That would have taken you a day, right? Maybe. The major activity you would have in mind is, where am I going to be eating the lamb? Is it my own farm lamb? Am I going to my neighbor's house? Or who's in charge of the lamb?
Still, we have the same question: where will we eat the Seder?
Whose house are we having Seder with? Are we coming here? Are we going to your parents' house? It's my parents' turn. Yeah, so yes, we do still have some of those same questions. But you don't have to worry about traveling with it and taking care of all of that. Okay, so a little more explanation in the text, and then we can maybe move on. So Yerach, if you could hit 3 and 4.
How is it for its own purpose and then for another purpose?
Right. Remember that part 2, it said for its purpose and another purpose, or for its own purpose and then another purpose. What does that mean? And they're going to give examples.
A, for the purpose of being a Pesach sacrifice first, and then for the purpose of being a well-being offering.
Right? So he brought it to be a Passover sacrifice, and then while it was being slaughtered, he changed his mind. That's a problem, right? It's no longer a Passover sacrifice then.
Okay.
And vice versa is part 4.
How is it for another purpose and then for its own purpose? A, for the purpose of being a well-being offering first, and then for the purpose of being a Pesach sacrifice.
Right? So he thought he was going to bring it as this well-being offering, and then while it was being slaughtered, he went, oh, Passover, right, quick, make it for one of that. And no, that doesn't work, right? Because what you mean, what you intend matters. You know, again and again and again, we've seen throughout the Mishnah, and hopefully you're also realizing throughout Judaism, it's not just doing stuff, it's feeling stuff, it's thinking stuff, it's believing things. That makes a difference.
So that poor guy that made the mistake,
Yeah, his whoops.
he has to go and get another lamb.
He has to go and get another lamb, or he has to find somebody that he can join with in order to eat for the sacrifice. Yes.
Either Pesach or the other one.
Right. Now, of course, the real solution is this. Know what you mean when you bring the sacrifice to the temple.
Don't
Right?
forget it's Pesach.
Don't forget it's Passover, but you know, it's the same thing when people are davening, when they are doing their prayers, right? Are you aware of what you are saying? Are you aware of what is in your heart, what is in your mind, where you are? You know before whom you stand is written on many synagogue walls for a very good reason. Because you're in the middle of saying something and suddenly it's like, wait, what am I saying? Why am I saying this? What's going on? Wait, what page are we on? I'm just saying it mechanically. You know, and this is the thing. The guy's daydreaming. He's walking into the temple, and the guy says, what's the lamb for? And he says, oh, it's, you know, a well-being offering or whatever. Oh, no. You don't just do this mechanically. You shouldn't do any part of Judaism mechanically because you're going to get in trouble. I can see the time. Yeah.
After sacrifice, they need to work sometimes days with the dead animal until they came to the home, because if they live in a Galilee, okay,
Mm-hmm.
and on very far, and they did the sacrifice in Jerusalem, and
Mhm.
need to walk there, it took days.
And that's why people
it's
would.
not a problem with the health and the animal, the meat and everything.
Oh no! In general, no. I mean, for the Pesach sacrifice, your family came with you to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Oh, everyone around.
Everybody was there
okay.
because you need to have it for the Seder. But in
Okay.
general, we in the modern world are much more squeamish about meat that is not being refrigerated. In general, many people, and you'll find this in very fancy, you know, chef type restaurants, meat will be aged unrefrigerated. It changes the texture, it changes the taste of the meat. Supposedly it's better. I've never eaten it, but it's supposed to be the way meat is best. But the problem is there's a fine line between it's getting better, dangerous. and so in the ancient world, people knew these things. And of course, how you cooked it made a big difference in all of that as well. So non-refrigerated meat isn't really that scary as long as you know what you're doing and you're eating it fairly soon.
So all the families came to so in Jerusalem during Pesach you can have 500,000 people.
And there was there's a huge discussion in the Talmud about the hospitality of Jerusalemites, of welcoming everybody from the country into the city during Pesach, because where else are people going to be? Because exactly as you say, if I live up in the Galil and the north of Israel, and I have to walk 2 days or even take my donkey a day and a half to get there, I can't get home for the Seder. The Seder has to be in Jerusalem.
And what happened if it's the time of Passover,
Mm-hmm.
and an army in a different country, they know that all the population will go to Jerusalem, and they put all the army in a border, so when everyone go during the week, they attack.
But God said that wouldn't happen.
But is there any
Yeah.
exception, like they say, okay, kind of for security, we cancel the sacrifices?
Okay,
or
so
to protect the land or something like that?
Pesach Sheni is a very real concept that comes up in the Torah, which is a month after first Passover, after the real Passover. People who couldn't come to the original Seder, for a lot of different reasons, which we're going to talk about, can then come a month later and get credit for having done the mitzvah. But in general, if there's onus, if there's an unavoidable problem that you can't participate in the Seder, you're not penalized in the eyes of heaven for missing it. It's just if you say, meh, it's too far. That's a problem. Or if you say, yeah, I'm just not feeling it today. That's a problem.
My donkey is sick.
Yeah.
But
My donkey is sick. Yeah.
so, Rabbi, when the Messiah comes
Mhm.
and appears, are we going to go back to the way it was?
When the Messiah comes and appears, he will tell us.
Yeah.
That's the best answer to that question. Right. So there are many people who act like they know what Mashiach will do and say. And I find that a bit presumptuous because there have been many scholars throughout Jewish history, throughout the classic tradition, that have argued some sacrifices, all sacrifices, almost no sacrifices. And I think that Mashiach is going to be able to come and set that straight. And in the meantime, we'll study.
And then we'll know what the real color of the tzitzit is, or the talit, the blue that everybody, all the rabbis.
That's a more interesting discussion for another time.
I know.
Okay, so chapter 5, Mishnah 3. We're making good time. It starts right at the very top of the handout. I'm not quite sure why when I was printing this I didn't make new pages for each one like I usually do. So it starts with if he slaughtered it.
Oh, okay. So this is one.
That's the first line of chapter 5, Mishnah 3.
If he slaughtered it for those who cannot eat it, or those who are not registered for it, for uncircumcised persons, or for the unclean person, it is unfit.
All right. So Natan, you asked me right at the beginning, does everyone have to go to the temple to do this? And I said no. In fact, you can appoint someone to go take the sacrifice on your behalf or on someone else's behalf. But again, coming back to intentionality. He is taking the sacrifice and he is going to the temple, and the sacrifice isn't his sacrifice. It's on behalf of his neighbor next door, who it turns out is ritually unclean, right? Ritually unclean people are not allowed to eat of the sacrifice. Therefore, that sacrifice doesn't count as a Passover sacrifice because he was intending the sacrifice to be on behalf of people who are not permitted to eat of it, and that's what that list means. The sacrifice doesn't count as the Passover sacrifice.
And what happened if he didn't know that it's unclean? Like, for example, someone died or had a sexual relationship and he didn't know.
So if we're talking about a mixed group, meaning some of them are unclean, some of them are clean, all of that, that's the next section. Okay, so you're already anticipating. Go ahead and read part 2 there.
2. If he slaughtered it for those who can eat it, and for those who cannot eat it, for those who are registered for it, and for those who are not registered for it, for circumcised and for uncircumcised persons, for unclean and for clean persons, it is fit.
Right, so if I'm sacrificing it on behalf of my neighborhood, right, my apartment building, I guess they didn't really have apartment, but my courtyard, right, my courtyard, we're all getting together, we're eating this. And it turns out, actually, some of them, are unclean. They had, a ritual problem, and now they're not able to eat it. It's okay. The Passover sacrifice is still good for the rest of us, as long as some of us were permitted to eat it when it was being sacrificed. It's good for those of us who can still eat it. But if I was only sacrificing it on behalf of someone else, and then it turns out they can't, I can't transfer it to another person. Because the sacrifice has to be for someone. You can't just generically slaughter a lamb and hang it up in the marketplace and say Passover sacrifice for sale, right? It has to be on behalf of someone. I just want to make sure that you understand that, right? You can't just like we talked about a talit a second ago. You can make a talit with nobody in mind, and you can sell the talit in your shop, no problem. And someone says I need a talit. They buy the talit, it's a good talit, no problem, mitzvah fulfilled. When it comes to a sacrifice, the sacrifice has to be done for someone. It can't just be done and then someone else can get credit for it and someone can buy the sacrifice ready-made. It has to be intimately connected to a human being. Otherwise, it isn't anything. It's just meat. And that's what we have grocery stores for. Right? The temple isn't just a way of doing grocery shopping. I mean, otherwise the priests in the temple would just slaughter, 10,000 sheep and then sell them at the door. That's not the way it's supposed to work. You bring it on behalf of you and those in your group for your Seder to be eaten. And if there's a problem with that group, you're all disqualified by some weird circumstance, sorry, it's no longer a Passover sacrifice. Okay?
So Rabbi, today, the way that Judaism is run,
Right.
the way it was run in the ancient times,
Right?
back in the ancient times, you were promised to go to heaven with all these sacrifices. How do people go to heaven today?
Well, first of all, you were not promised to go to heaven from all the sacrifices. The language doesn't really work. If you fulfill the mitzvot,
Yeah.
right, and you are directing your heart towards Adonai, then yes, there is an idea of the world to come, right, a portion in the world to come. But in fact, later in the Talmud, they discuss very clearly that even if a person fails to fulfill the mitzvot, as long as their heart is fully connected to God and to Judaism, they still have a share in the world to come. Right? The mitzvot were not our purchase price to get to heaven. Right? This is not our ticket to paradise. This is our means of nurturing our soul here and of allowing it to grow so that in Olam Haba, in the world to come, our soul is able to shine more brightly. And it's not a transaction.
But back in the ancient days, when the Jews used to sacrifice, it was based on your sins and your sins being washed away.
Yes and no. That is to say, your sins could still be forgiven even without a sacrifice. Right?
Back in the ancient
even
days?
back in the ancient days, if there was no way for you to bring a sacrifice, right? Let's say that you died before you could bring a sacrifice. You committed a sin, but before you could get to the temple, you died. Your tshuva still did its job. And if you sacrificed an animal but didn't do tshuva, didn't repent, didn't actually want forgiveness for your sins, the sacrifice didn't do anything. All you did was kill an animal. So the sacrifices were never a transactional process. They were always meant to be a spiritual signpost guiding the people towards the proper intention and the proper expression of what they felt inside. But without what they felt inside, all it was slaughtering an animal. And the Torah makes that clear, and the rabbis make it super clear over and over again. Whether or not every individual Israelite kept that in mind, well, they kept it in mind as often as modern Jews keep in mind that doing the mitzvot today is not a transaction. That doing the mitzvot today is meant to grow our souls and to deepen our spiritual connection to God and the world. Many people don't treat it that way. They treat it like just a checklist of things to do. And that's a problem today, and it was a problem then. So we're still human beings, and so were our ancestors. Okay. One thing that I did want to point out, because people often will wonder, can you have somebody that isn't Jewish, and in particular not circumcised, come to your Seder?
Of course.
Well, what did we just read?
You're not supposed to.
What's that?
I think they say you're not supposed to have.
They can come to the Seder, but they can't go to attend to the sacrifice.
Okay, they can't eat from the sacrifice. If you are sacrificing a lamb for your Seder, you're in big trouble, right? Because you're doing a sacrifice that you shouldn't be doing now. Right? There's no temple in Jerusalem. No one in this room should be sacrificing a lamb for Passover. If the temple was still running and if we were still doing the sacrifices, then yes, an uncircumcised person cannot participate in the Seder meal. However, right now, 21st century Judaism, as of December 30th, 2015, there is no reason for a non-circumcised person to not attend the Seder.
But then that means women couldn't eat in the Seder.
Women were never asked to be circumcised,
Yeah.
so that's not an issue.
That's what makes me question. What about the Jewish women?
Right, but women were not.
I know.
No.
They're not required.
I'm trying to come up with a delicate way of putting this. The word uncircumcised, both in English as well as in Hebrew, means still having the covering. Women don't have that
I know,
either.
I know, that's why I'm saying, you said if it's uncircumcised person.
No, you're not quite getting it. If you are uncircumcised, it doesn't mean you didn't have the operation. That's not what uncircumcised means.
Okay.
Uncircumcised
Just the
means
heart?
you have that piece of skin on that piece of your body, the foreskin.
I know, that's
Right.
why, I understand women don't have it, and we don't get circumcision.
Right.
So you're saying that if this person's uncircumcised, then it's wrong for them to attend to Pesach.
Right.
But what about the women who aren't circumcised, that don't
Katie,
allow
hold
to
on.
be circumcised?
Women are
Hold
not
on.
required.
No, it's not a
No,
question
what
of not
she's trying
required.
to say
They're not
is
equipped.
what's happened
We're
with
not
women that
equipped.
are
Look,
not
hold on.
Jews.
Replace the word uncircumcised with still has a foreskin. Those who still have a foreskin can't eat from the Passover sacrifice. Do women still have a
No, we
foreskin?
don't have
So
that.
they can eat from the sacrifice.
Oh,
But yes.
Okay, sorry, I was trying to be delicate, but that's.
But
But-
what about women that are another religion?
I don't think they have foreskins either.
No, but what about a woman from another religion, like a Roman religion or a Greek?
You mean in the
There's
ancient
one-
world?
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. I'm not like.
You know, I don't think I've ever come across that particular question. Would a woman from a non-Jewish culture in the ancient world have been permitted to eat from a Passover sacrifice in the ancient day? I don't think I've ever come across that question.
I'm sorry,
yeah.
I'm not trying
No,
to give
no,
you a
it's-
hard, I'm not trying to give you a hard
Yeah.
time. I understand what you're talking about, but
Right.
then I'm thinking of, well, what about women that are not Jewish, or like,
Right.
I mean, because it's what it sounds.
We're going to have to
like-
let that question stand.
Okay, real quick, what it sounds to me like is only men was allowed only Jewish men was allowed at the Pesach dinner. That's what it sounds like to me. Only.
Well, except for the fact that the Torah, as well as, again, Jewish law, is very explicit that this is a family affair, that everybody from the family has to be there, right? Because you are talking to your children, you are retelling the story, and everybody participated in the redemption. You know, God didn't only redeem the men from Egypt, or else there would have been a lot of women left behind. And so the miracle was done for all of us, and all of us then are required to participate in its observance. So women definitely were front and center in all of this.
But here,
Yeah.
say that for circumcised and for uncircumcised people in the group,
Mhm.
meaning you have uncircumcised people in the group that are eating the Passover lamb.
What do you mean?
You say,
No. The lamb is not disqualified,
The
but
lamb.
they still don't eat it,
Oh, I see.
right?
So
It's-
they are part of the group. The lamb is not is kosher,
right,
but they can see and watch how the other people are eating.
but
and
they still
cannot eat.
can't eat it. Exactly. So if you go to sacrifice this and you come back and the guy says, "Oh, by the way, I'm not circumcised. Does that matter?" You go, "Okay. Could have told me this earlier. You just can't eat, but it's okay. The lamb is still good for the rest of us."
And what happens if someone by mistake ate?
That's between them and God.
And God.
Right, that's a transgression,
Yeah,
but it's
that's-
between them and God. So if the
Okay.
person doesn't tell you they're not circumcised and goes ahead and eats and all of that, you're not responsible for checking everybody at the table.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's between them and God. Okay, 3 and 4 are two other ways that we can disqualify it by special circumstance. Keep going.
If he slaughtered it before midday, it is disqualified, because it is said, and all of this assembled congregation of Israelites shall slaughter it at twilight.
Right, so Twilight, that's not the vampire books. This is twilight, meaning near the end of the day, right? If you slaughter the sacrifice over here, it's a problem, right? So you can't slaughter it during the first part of the day. It has to be in the afternoon, because the Torah says
7
in the afternoon, twilight,
8, yeah.
right? So it uses the word twilight. We take the Torah seriously. It means it has to be slaughtered over here. If you think I'm going to beat the Passover rush and I'm going to get to the temple right in the morning to have my lamb sacrificed, and
No good.
it's no longer a Passover sacrifice. It's a dead lamb, but it's not a Passover sacrifice. Keep going.
If he slaughtered it before the evening tamid, it is fit, providing that the person steals its blood until that of the tamid is sprinkled.
Go ahead and do part A.
Nevertheless, if it was sprinkled before the tamid, it is fit.
All right, so once again, we get the hatchila and b'dei avad. We get things that are, in English, we would say a priori or ex post facto, have different circumstances. So a priori, from the outset, if you're trying to do this kind of the right way, but you sneak in before the tamid, right? Maybe you forgot that today the tamid would be later because you didn't have to worry about, Shabbat, and so you brought it a bit early, and you get it sacrificed, and you're like looking around going, wait a minute, where's everybody else? Oh man, I'm early. It's like daylight savings time when you end up early at work, right? You're here an hour early. All right.
Happened to me once.
If you get it sacrificed earlier, before the tamid, remember our very first Mishnah of this chapter,
Yes.
they can stir the blood in the basin. They catch the blood under the neck when it gets slaughtered. You can keep stirring the blood while the tamid happens. And then once the tamid is done, the blood gets sprinkled on the altar, right? If you've sacrificed it earlier, that's the best way to do it. But even if you didn't, right? Even if you went ahead and sprinkled it before the tamid offering, you're still after midday, but you've gone before the tamid, all right, yeah, it still counts. It's still okay. It's still twilightish enough because it's after midday that it's okay. But really, you should do it after the tamid. That's the best way to do it. So we sort of have a hierarchy of preference. The best way to do it is wait until after the tamid and do it then. If you do it before the tamid, the best thing to do is keep stirring and sprinkle the blood after the tamid. If you sprinkle the blood earlier, at least it's still okay, right? So there's
intention matter.
Intention matters, and there are certain things that, intention or not, you bring it early, you bring it for the wrong person, and I don't care what you were thinking, it's just not good. But for many other things, there is flexibility. That doesn't mean we don't push to do it the right way, but it means if a mistake was made, there sometimes is enough that we can cover the mistake. Just not always. So you try to do it the right way from the start. Make sense? Good. If that's becoming a familiar idea, like we talked about in brachot, for like the prayer for doing Shema and all of that, where you should do it before midnight, but if you don't, you have until dawn. That should become a familiar idea with how Rabbinic Judaism works, which is there's a best way, and then there's this is the last.
If you forgot, yeah.
And then this is the last way, and then there's no way. Just not going to happen now. All right, and that's what we're talking about here. All right. Chapter 5, Mishnah 4. Yeah. Oh, you're volunteering? I thought you had a question.
No, I was going to volunteer.
Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. There, right. So we're at the bottom of that same page.
Oh, okay. Exodus chapter 34.
Read where it says Mishnah 4, 1 parentheses. One who slaughters.
Okay. One who slaughters the Pesach with
Chametz.
chametz in the possession violates a negative commandment.
All right. Let's go back to our discussion about chametz. Right? You were supposed to get rid of your chametz.
Mhm.
Well, imagine I'm supposed to get rid of my chametz, remember, in the early part of this day. And the Passover sacrifice is supposed to be in the later part of today. What happens if I still have my chametz while I'm at the temple?
I guess.
Right? So, well, that's the problem. If you're sacrificing the Passover sacrifice while you still own chametz, then you are committing a transgression. Right? You are breaking the mitzvah of not having chametz in your possession for Pesach. So that's a problem. Rabbi Yehuda, on the other hand, says,
Rabbi Judah says, also the evening
Tamid.
Oh, Tamid.
Right? So pause there. Right? That's all he says.
Mhm.
Which means even if it's during the Tamid period that you still have chametz, you have violated the commandment. So remember before we said you got to get rid of your chametz here, right, in the morning. If you haven't, when do you actually break the mitzvah? That's what they're arguing about. And they're saying the breaking of the mitzvah of owning chametz happens either by when you sacrifice or when the tamid happens. and the tamid would be earlier, generally speaking. Remember, the exceptional cases that we just talked about are not the norm, but generally speaking, you do tamid first. I mean, the temple does tamid first, and then the people do the Passover. So the general idea was at the Passover sacrifice, that's your last do or die moment for getting rid of chametz. And Rabbi Yehuda makes it a little bit stricter and says, actually, when the community does the tamid, that is your do or die point. All right? And Rabbi Shimon is going to add another layer.
A. Rabbi Shimon says, if he slaughters the Pesach with chametz on the 14th of its own purpose, he is liable. If, for a different purpose, he's exempt.
All right, remember that whole what does it matter? You know, what is this lamb about? Well, here it becomes important for its own reason. If you go to the temple and you're going to be slaughtering the lamb, and you originally thought it would be for your Pesach lamb, but you turn it intentionally into a different type of offering, even if you still own chametz, you're okay. Because you haven't slaughtered the Passover lamb, because you changed its purpose. On the other hand, if you go and you slaughter the Passover lamb for being a Passover lamb and you still own chametz, you're in trouble, because you should have gotten rid of your chametz first. Leavening, got it? Okay.
Which one? Which one?
Which one? Well, we're not done yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the mission is not over yet.
Okay.
So it's only halftime. Onward.
All right. B. But for all other sacrifices, whether slaughtered for their own purpose or for a different purpose, he is exempt.
Okay, right. So if he slaughters a different sacrifice, just he felt like doing a well-being offering on this day, and he meant it to be a well-being offering on this day,
Correct.
even if he still owns chametz, he's okay. Right. So it's not the sacrificing that's the point; it's the Passover sacrificing that's the point. So he's refining it again. And then part C.
If he slaughters the Pesach with chametz on the festival for its own purpose, he is exempt. If for a different purpose, he is liable.
Okay, so this is a little bit right. He's slaughtering an animal as a Passover sacrifice on the festival, right? But he is doing it. Hold on a second. My brain just dropped out of my ear. Trying to remember exactly how this went. If he slaughters it with Pesach, with chametz on the festival. Got it. Okay. If you still own chametz and you're slaughtering it on the festival, you are exempt because that isn't a Passover sacrifice, because the festival has already begun. The sacrifice has to happen on the 14th. Once the 15th happens, it's no longer a Passover sacrifice. Remember?
But how can you have chametz if you're already in Chag?
You can't. That's why you're liable, right? That's why you're still liable for having chametz, right? You're still in trouble for having chametz. So yeah, that's exactly right. But if you're doing it for a different purpose, then you've got this problem. You still have chametz, and you're not supposed to be sacrificing it with chametz, so you're in trouble. Okay, and part D.
But for all other sacrifices slaughtered on the festival with chametz, whether for their own purpose or for another purpose, he is liable, except in the case or a sin offering which he slaughtered for a different purpose.
Okay, so in general, he tries to round out, if you slaughter another type of sacrifice during the Chag of Pesach with chametz, right, then you are liable, because you're not supposed to slaughter anything with chametz, right? Except, and this is talking about the prohibition not just of owning chametz, but the prohibition of making a sacrifice with chametz. Does that make sense? Okay. Except in the case of the sin offering, right? Because the sin offering is disqualified if it has the wrong intent during Pesach. And so it's no longer a sacrifice. and therefore you didn't make a sacrifice with chametz. You just killed an animal while having chametz. And so it wasn't a violation of the altar rules, it was just a violation of still owning chametz, which is a big violation, but it's a different violation. Or a separate violation might be a better way of putting it. How are we doing?
Rabbi,
Yes.
you keep mentioning this Exodus 34:25.
Mm-hmm.
What does it say in that passage or in that
That's not
sentence?
right. Not to offer with the. It's at the top of the comments here, right? The introduction. There we are. You shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with anything leavened. You don't do a sacrifice in any sacrifice, not just Passover.
Oh, okay.
So which one? So Exodus 34,
34:25.
Yeah, verse 25.
34.
34:25. Chapter 34, verse 25. Right, which says not to offer any sacrifice with leavening. Right, it's with chametz. So you can't, because you can't do a Pesach, this is part C, because you can't do a Pesach sacrifice for Pesach after the holiday's begun, then it doesn't count as a sacrifice. And because it doesn't count as a sacrifice, you haven't violated the rule of sacrificing something with chametz. You still are in trouble for having chametz.
And anyway, also you are offering a sin offering. Means you are doing something wrong, so you already are paying for what you're doing.
Yes. So yes, you have another issue there. You really should probably talk to your rabbi before you go to the temple next time, because you're getting this all wrong. Okay, you're getting this all wrong.
So now, Rabbi, my question is now, since they were doing sacrifice 3 times a day, and then there was some major sacrifice on the high holy days, what would God do, or what was the rules if you kept repeating the same sin?
It all depends on that. That's not a rule just for sacrifices. That's a rule for us in our own day.
Right.
If somebody commits the same transgression and seeks tshuva, does repentance and wants to return meaningfully, heartfully, they really don't want to do this again, and then they do it again.
Then it's different, yeah.
No, it's not different. It's a new sin, right? And then they can do the process again, and they really mean they don't want to do it ever again, and then they do. Then they go through the process all over again, right? Tshuva always can take care of the transgression you made. If you commit a transgression and you say, well, I'll do tshuva, whatever, but you don't really mean it, or you plan, I'll do tshuva today for my bacon cheeseburger, and tomorrow I have a lunch appointment at McDonald's, then tshuva doesn't count, right? Because tshuva only counts if you're really doing it with an honest intention that you're not going to do the transgression again. So if you were honestly trying to, stop doing sin A, whatever you're doing that you're doing regularly, you're honestly trying to stop it, and you bring the sacrifice, or you do tshuva in the modern sense as well, with a true heart and with a real intention, then yeah, you get taken care of each and every time. It's crossed off the list. You've taken care of it, and then you keep coming back and you do it again and again and again. That's called learning how to ride a bike, right? You're going to keep falling down. You're going to keep skinning your knee, and you get back up on the bike. That's what you're supposed to do.
It's like an alcoholic. Like, what do you do with a person that's an alcoholic that loves God, but is not willing to repent?
Well, if they're not willing to repent, that's a very different issue. But someone who someone can be addicted but still want to change. Addiction is by definition often able to overpower even our best intentions. That's what addiction means, as opposed to just I like it. But an addiction is a physical and chemical and psychological compulsion that forces a person to either engage in a behavior or substance abuse over and over again. But they can legitimately want to break the cycle and try legitimately over and over after every relapse, and they are considered to be doing a good job. We'd like them to succeed, that'd be even better, but they're not hypocritical for every time they want to do tshuva. They're just human, and we should help them in every way we can. We don't push them aside just because they keep failing. We try to do what we can to help them. Someone who is unwilling to do tshuva, someone who is unwilling to admit that there's a problem, unwilling to say that what they did was wrong, doesn't want to change because they're perfectly happy the way they are. That's a very different issue, and one for a much longer discussion. Well, if someone legitimately loves God, they wouldn't be happy doing something that is a direct violation of the commandments. That's kind of, you can't say, oh, I love God, and deliberately, willingly, and happily break a commandment. You can do it painfully and horribly and feeling guilty about it and try to fix it over and over again and still love God, no problem. But you can't say, I love God, let me go beat up this dog. That doesn't work. And say I'm beating up the dog because I enjoy it. That just doesn't work.
But there are people who are born mentally insane,
Yes.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
who will end up in a psychiatric ward for the rest of their life because they're crazy and they're insane, but they really have a good heart. So what happens to someone like that? And
those that are actually mentally incompetent, that really are mentally completely unable, is a very special category of Jewish law for people that are actually crazy.
But like really smart.
It's not a question of smart. If they have no ability for rational thought or rational direction of their life, if they live in a complete delusion or suffer from schizophrenia or multiple personality or all sorts of other things that are just dominate their ability to function in life, then we treat them as someone who is seriously ill. And they are not held responsible for their behavior, but we are held responsible for their treatment, for making sure they are properly cared for and can't be a danger to themselves or others. But that's a very special case. That's not the norm. There may be people out there that we say, you're crazy. They're not actually crazy. They just made choices that we disagree with. Sometimes legitimately they made choices that we disagree with and they were fine for making those choices, sometimes because they were wrong. But that's a whole much bigger conversation. But our time tonight, yes.
Last question.
Yes.
Sorry, I was thinking about her question. Why can't we generalize that the spirit of the concept uncircumcised is for every non-Jew?
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, when I read uncircumcised, for me, is the spirit is meaning the concept of everyone, every goy, non-Jew.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's including every non-Jew that under uncircumcised, for me, it's also for men and female. It's a way to generalize the concept. Why is it wrong?
Well, it's not that it's wrong. I don't know about the female category, and I would be hesitant to generalize without a source in our tradition. That is to say, we don't make halachic statements because we think this time it should be generalized or not. We make halachic statements if our tradition has chosen to generalize in certain cases or not. There's a whole process in the logic of the rabbis of when we generalize and when we particularize, when we make something narrower, and that's a whole process that goes through, and our tradition gives us those guidelines. It's not up to each of us individually. So you may be right that they may have generalized that, but from what I remember, they also kept it particular enough that if there was a Jew that was uncircumcised for legitimate reasons or illegitimate reasons, they did not eat of the Passover sacrifice. So it can't just be Jew versus non-Jew. It was particular enough that it could limit certain Jews' participation in the Passover sacrifice. It was a rare case, but that is a legitimate concern in the ancient world for certain people. And there were sometimes there were very good reasons. Sometimes you were prohibited from circumcising a boy. If two of his brothers had died from Milah earlier, mm-hmm. you didn't do it for the next. Well, that kid, when he was growing up and as an adult, would not be eating from the Pesach sacrifice. So it doesn't mean that you're wrong. It just means you can't eat it. And that's I guess, a good place to finish, and maybe a good reminder. The halakha was never intended to say these people are good or these people are bad because they can or can't eat from the sacrifice. It simply is what is required by the way the Torah describes who can and who can't eat from sacrifices and from the Passover sacrifice in particular. It's not a moral judgment. It's not a value judgment. Someone could be ritually impure because they were burying, somebody who had just died. That was a great mitzvah to take care of a deceased. But now they can't. Now they can't do the Passover sacrifice. We shouldn't see that as a value judgment against them. It just is. It's part of how the sacrifice works. Because there is a balance. We've talked a lot about what you mean and what you feel and the intention and all of that, but there are limits to feelings. And sometimes even the best feelings or even the worst feelings can't change the edge of halakha, of where halakha says here and no further.
But if for what we read, the sacrifice and eating sacrifice is so central, core of the Passover, that is the redemption from Egypt and our role and the role of God in our life. Don't allowing a Jew that maybe for medical reason it's not sacrificed, you are giving them an extra burden.
Yes. Well, I'm not. Torah is.
Yeah, Hashem.
Right? It's the halakha is. And realizing that there are certain restrictions that may go against our own sensibilities or preferences is a very difficult part of coming to grips with what halakha is meant to do. That halakha doesn't always condemn the people we want to be condemned. Halakha doesn't always celebrate the people we want celebrated. And halakha doesn't always do what we think would be the best thing to do. And sometimes it forces us to do things that maybe aren't as comfortable for us as we want. That doesn't mean we follow it blindly. It means that we try to understand it over and over and over by reading and studying and looking at the commentaries and how it's been applied. And if we try to keep a balanced perspective, that this is not here to please me and this is not here to annoy me, but that this is here to help me turn Torah into a functional life, with time you begin to feel the balance, that halakha is very, very accommodating, but it also has limits. And that they're not meant vindictively or cruelly, and that it includes much more than it excludes for the society and for its individuals. But when you're part of the group that's being excluded, or when you are sympathetic to a group that's being excluded, sometimes exclusion feels like persecution. And that's a difficult feeling to fight against. But sometimes exclusion just is exclusion. If I'm going rock climbing and someone says, can I come too? And they've never been rock climbing in their life, they're a danger to me and they're a danger to themselves. I'm not being mean. It's just they're not appropriate for this trip. And that I hope they're not going to cry about that. It just is. I know that in many of these cases, these are things that you can't fix. You can't overcome. But certain things in Torah are as they are, and wrestling with them is part of our burden as being Jews who are committed to the tradition.
Yeah, see, Rabbi, with the Pesach, with his question, and from what I'm understanding, and also what came to my mind is the reason why it seems so kind of like the people being an outcast for not being part of the Pesach with being, not being circumcised. I think it's Hashem's way of showing the world that he means business.
Okay, I think God showed
to humble the Jews and also show the world the people outside of Judaism that he's holding them and holding the Jewish people at a higher level of following his mitzvah and his commandments, and he doesn't need someone to be basically playing around.
I don't know about a higher standard or means business. I mean, I think God showed the world that he meant business when he made the world. That was sort of his ultimate show of how serious he was.
Look
but
how strict Hashem was with the Israelites in the wilderness. Look how hard he was.
If you ask me, he let them off rather easy. But that's a whole nother discussion.
I don't think he did. He that one family that turned against Moses who wanted to take over.